Hello everyone and welcome back to JB's Total Gaming, where today I'm going to be talking about the 25 games from 2017 that I think are definitely worth checking out if you haven't yet. Now, I will start off first of all by talking about 3 games from Nintendo. Nintendo has a thing where if you show anything from Nintendo, they tend to flag your videos no matter what. So we're going to talk about these real briefly and then cut to actual other stuff, so you have to see my face for just a couple minutes. First of all, I want to talk about Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. While this is a game that I don't think deserves a 10 out of 10 and certainly has some flaws, I still do think it's a fantastic game. Obviously, that's going to be on my list, potentially on a Game of the Year list if I did that, a shorter list. Also, Mario Odyssey. This is a game I actually like a little bit better because I feel like it's not lacking some of the things that bother me about Zelda, and it's just a game that gets having fun. It's just a fun game. So if you enjoy 3D platformers, I mean, obviously, again, a game that's on a lot of Game of the Year lists out there, probably something that you've seen. Now, something else that you may not have expected on this list, though you expect the big Mario and Zelda game, but is Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battles. This is a turn-based strategy game in the vein of XCOM and other games like that, in a way a little bit less complicated, but not necessarily super easy. There is some traversing of a map and slight puzzle solving and things like that and other things that go on. But I feel like Nintendo managed to take the Rabbids, a franchise that was never really all that great and kind of dying off. And Ubisoft actually was got the licensing to do this. They're the company that actually made it, and combine it with Mario into a turn-based strategy, and everyone was like, what are you doing? I actually was kind of holding out hope, and it turned out this game is really, really fun and a good introduction to younger people into turn-based strategies who may like some of the things like XCOM later on and whatever that. And again, just a really well done game. So there's 3 from Nintendo that I definitely want to point out. Now let's go ahead and jump to some other ones. There is one game I'm going to mention that actually didn't come out this year. I'm not including that in the 25, but I'll explain that in a second. Alright, you may see this and say, why am I talking about Path of Exile? This is a game that came out in 2013, a game I've talked about more than once before. Well, I was thinking about doing another Game of the Year awards, but I said, instead of doing a Game of the Year awards thing where I mentioned multiple games multiple times, multiple categories, let's just talk about the best games of the year. And one category I thought about doing that they did at the Game Awards that I thought was a good idea is Best Ongoing Game. So we could talk about things like Overwatch or League of Legends or whatever. Personally, I really tend to lean towards some games like this. Games like Path of Exile, that is a free-to-play action RPG, I think is just a fantastic game. Similar to Diablo is the game you've most likely heard about if you're not a big fan of this franchise or not familiar with this franchise. And Path of Exile gives you a ton of content for free that you can go out and just play, and you can contribute if you want to, but you definitely don't have to. Warframe is also a first-person shooter that I want to give an honorable mention to as well. So best ongoing game, if I was doing awards, I would have given it to Path of Exile. Wanted to mention at least one more in Warframe, but let's jump back into games actually from 2017. And well, we are going to talk about really quickly here. Well, I'm going to mention this. I mentioned this early on, a couple months into the year. I talked about how this could be one of the best gaming years of all time. There's so many great games early in the year, and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds isn't out yet. It is early access. They say it will be out soon, and well, yeah, there's just a ridiculous number of people playing and loving this game. And well, I do want to mention there are other early access games out there like Slay the Spire. If you're interested in card-based combat, sort of turn-based games, may not be nearly as big as popular as this one, but I had to mention this as kind of a early access game. There's a few of them out there, but this is the one that I definitely wanted to mention. I am including this from 2017, but there's a beta about it, so I'm just going to mention it is in early access right now. You can see mixed reviews. There's a lot of reasons for that and things that the company did that weren't necessarily all that great, but this game is a stupidly popular game where you drop in 100 people and they all try to kill each other by the end. So there you go. We had to at least mention it. You can't talk about 2017 without talking about this game that's become the most played game of the year probably. All right, next up let's talk about Horizon Zero Dawn. So I'm going to jump to Steam for a lot of the other stuff, but this isn't available on Steam. So while I cover mostly PC games, I definitely am willing to talk about games like on Nintendo or other consoles. Horizon Zero Dawn is a game that some people are excited about. Some people are like, this looks dumb, mechanized robots, what is this? This game is gorgeous, it plays well, it has a great protagonist. You can debate about the story, but it's better than most games of this style in my opinion. It's just a fantastic game, and we couldn't talk about the year without talking about that game. Now, a game that maybe is a little bit less known that Some people may obviously know about this, but it's because of Japanese RPG, and some people may not be into those. But if you're going to check one out, Persona 5 is one I think that you should check out. There is a lot of gameplay in this game. It's a really big, in-depth game. There's a lot of things that are a little bit unique to other Western RPGs, but it is a gorgeous game with a great soundtrack that plays great. And if you're interested in Japanese RPGs or you don't know much about them, then this is one I'd suggest checking out. Maybe even for people who aren't sure if they'd like one. There's a lot to this game. Again, I'm not going to be able to tell you enough about it, just talking about it briefly, but I definitely think this was a fantastic game from this year. Again, maybe would have been on the short list for my game of the year this year if I'd done the award show. All right, before we jump to Steam, let's talk real briefly about a game that came out, at least in America, early this year. It came out in Japan before that, I believe. Yakuza Zero. Now, Yakuza is kind of a brawler, kind of, there is a lot of fighting and things like that happen in the game, but one of the things that made this game unique is its silliness. There are some just weird storylines in it. Not weird as in like supernatural and that, but just odd, a ton of different weird mini games and things like that you can play, and a good enough combat system. And while the combat system I don't think is the best ever, it's enjoyable enough, and then along with all of the extra stuff in this game that make it ridiculous and fun, I definitely had to include Yakuza Zero on the list for this year. Alright, another game that came out early this year that people may have forgotten about, Resident Evil 7. So Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is a game that, while a lot of people are going to say the first half was way stronger than the second half, and I actually agree with that, this is a game that I feel like returned Resident Evil to the forefront. I feel like after Resident Evil 4, they've had just a lot of, well, the numbered games and the offshoot games have either been okay to just really, really bad. And I feel like this is a game that really helped out bring Resident Evil back to where it should be, and also has a pretty cool VR version as well if you were into that. So we're gonna be jumping around from like AAA games to indie games all over the place. I didn't necessarily do this in any order. And next we're going to be talking about DokiDoki Literature Club. So we talked about free-to-play games. This is a free-to-play game. It's not an online ongoing game. This is a game that you may look at it and say, this looks like a Japanese anime dating sim. And, well, it is for a while. All I'll say is that there's more to this game, and that it's going to take you longer than you might expect to get more to get to the more than Japanese anime dating sim. There's a lot more to it. There is a warning. I won't say anything about the game. There's a warning that it's for not for younger people or people who are easily disturbed, and that's all I'll say. And as far as free-to-play games go now, as opposed to like Warframe or these online games that you can keep playing for a while, this is one of the best free-to-play just story games I have ever seen. It's fantastic. While I can say it's not going to be for everyone, I can't really say why it's not going to be for everyone without talking about it too much. Just go check it out and be patient with when things get more interesting than you might expect. Alright, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Night in the Woods because I've talked about this game multiple times before on the channel. It's one of my, if not my favorite story game of all time. Not for the same reasons. There are a lot of there are a lot of great story games out there that have great like ending moments and really heartfelt, make you cry. This game isn't set up about that. This game is set up to, even though it's about cartoon animals, just be very real. And well, I've talked about it many times, and it just, the characters and the things going on in this game are more real than you might expect from the aesthetic style. And if the story of a 20-year-old coming home from college and struggling with life and what to do sounds like it could be potentially interesting to you, then I definitely suggest checking out this game. And by the way, the Steam Winter Sale is going on right now, so quite a few of these games I'm talking about are actually on sale right now. Alright, so let's jump ahead to Holonight. Holonight is also a game I've talked about multiple times on the channel before. Holonight, you play this beetle type thing in this bug world, and it is a action platform Metroidvania. If you don't know what that means, basically, yeah, you're going to be jumping around fighting, and then you're going to uncover the world as you go, uncovering new abilities that allow you to traverse what eventually becomes a very big world better. It has a great sound design and soundtrack. It has combat that is relatively simple but gets more complicated as you get these upgrades and things that you can do and spells and things like that. And I just think it's an incredibly enjoyable game would be on my short list for overall game of the year this year. Just go play Holonight. All right, next up we have Prey. So Prey came out relatively early this year, and a lot of people may have kind of missed on this one, not really thought about too much. It is kind of a remake of a game that had nothing to do with this game. It's a weird, I don't know how to describe it, and a lot of people have said, and I would agree, this game is kind of a spiritual successor to like System Shock 2, which you might say wasn't Bioshock that. Well, it was. There's a lot of similarities, and if you enjoy that style of gameplay, then I definitely suggest checking out Prey, a really fantastic first-person shooter this year that has a pretty out there, interesting story and a lot of different ways you can build your character and play the game, which is something that when it's well done is always a nice bonus. All right, next up, we have What Remains of Edith Finch. This actually won the award at the Game Awards this year. I was really surprised and happy that this did. This is a story-based game. While there are things you will be doing within the game itself, there is a little bit of gameplay to it. It is a story game. It is an odd story game, but it is, again, one of my favorite story games of all time. It has a fantastic story, just enough of the gameplay and stuff to bring you into it that it's not just a pure walking simulator. But so if mostly pure story games don't interest you, don't check this out, but this deals with some really serious stuff, some interesting stuff, a little bit, but for the most part it's just a fascinating journey, and if you enjoy story games, this is a must play. All right, next up we have this Divinity Original Sin 2. Divinity Original Sin was a great CRPG, old style computer RPG like from the 90s. They eventually did a version where you could do cooperative play, drop in, drop out, with couch co-op or online co-op. And, well, they just included, and voice acting for the entire game, they just included all that at the launch of Divinity Original Sin 2. It is just an amazing, fantastic game. If you like CRPGs, Baldur's Gate, things like that from back in the day, or if you haven't played them, and they sound interesting with turn-based, this has an action point style combat and turn-based, really in-depth story that is less annoying than a lot of these because there's voice acting for all of it, and surprisingly good voice acting. Hey, Bethesda, pay attention. This game has a lot of characters, and they don't all sound the same. Just an amazing game, and if you enjoyed that style of gameplay, and it is a super in-depth long game, and again, great cooperative supports, voice acting throughout, then definitely check out Divinity Original Sin 2. Next up, we have Nier Automata. Divinity would be on my short list for Game of the Year. So would Nier Automata. This is a game that combines kind of the out there storytelling of the developer of Nier, along with now better gameplay and better fighting than those games had before. This is a game that if you really want to see everything it has to offer, you're going to have to play through multiple times. That's all I'm going to say about that. And, well, if the word existential interests you, then check out this game. This is a game that I feel like, while the gameplay is interesting and it sometimes transitions in other style gameplays, there are some boring segments of the game as well. There's a lot of walking around and whatever, and just trying to, there's not as much in your face action as like Bayonetta or some other games that the developer did. Now this is a different lead person as far as the story and all of that, but it's just it's a ridiculous game, and it's out there maybe a little bit too anime and weird for some people, but if you can get past it, I think there's an incredible story if you want to invest the time, knowing that you may have to go through it a couple of times. Things do change somewhat as you go, and again, on my short list for potential Game of the Year, in large part because of the story. But the gameplay's fun too. All right, another game I've talked about a few times, The Sexy Brutale. It's a terrible name, and it is a game where, and it's 50% off right now too, by the way, but it is a game where you're kind of Groundhog Daying around this weird casino hotel thing, where there's a lot of terrible things happening. It's a puzzle-solving game. It's gorgeous to look at. It has, again, a great soundtrack, and if kind of, now this is a story game that has a lot of gameplay to it and puzzle-solving, and if that's things that check boxes that might interest you, then again, check this game out. It not only looks great, but I think it's really interesting. It could be a little bit tedious for some people if you don't necessarily like puzzles or the idea of repeating certain stuff, but again, a high recommendation if some of the things that I mentioned are things that interest you in general. Now, again, I couldn't talk about 2017 without talking about Getting Over It. This game took Twitch by storm. It originally was only available in the like Humble Bundle package, but you can now get it on Steam. And if you haven't seen this game yet, some people would say it's just a frustration simulator, and it's terrible. And the game is designed around you losing progress and potentially going all the way back to the beginning. And well, I saw an interview with the person who designed it, and I think there's a lot of brilliant decisions in this. And even though some people might say that this game is incredibly frustrating, it's random, the control scheme is you just move the mouse around to control the hammer, and that's it. There actually are skills you can learn and you can get through, and it's and you can get to the end, and there's something to that. But anyways, this game is really popular on Twitch. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it, but I couldn't talk about 2017 without this game. I'm particularly interested in it after hearing the one person who made this game, basically what their thoughts on it was and kind of why they went about doing it. So again, if you're easily frustrated and that sort of thing annoys you, stay away. But if you're interested in a challenge and learning the control schemes and how different obstacles work, then you may have a good time with it, even though you will yell at it at some point. All right, Cuphead. Wow. Some of the games on this list are on there in part because I feel like they have great aesthetics. You know, Horizon Zero Dawn just looks great in general, but there are games with interesting aesthetic choices. I feel like Holonight would be on that list. But if I did an award show this year for just art design, Cuphead would win it. This is a game that's been in development for a long time. When we first saw it, we're like, this is amazing, but will they pull it off? They did. Again, also great soundtrack as well, and just a game that looks like an early cartoon, but is amazing. Also super hard, by the way. This is a kind of action platformer. There are kind of platforming segments, a lot of combat. Kind of most of the game is kind of boss rushes, different bosses. Again, super hard, just like getting over it, although you won't lose all of your progress in this game, but still, if that interests you, then check out this game. And it's gorgeous. Would definitely win my award for best art design of the year if I was doing that this year. Now going to a slightly different art design, West of Loathing. So I loved this game. I don't know if it would make like maybe top 5 game of the year candidates for me, but it would be close. I really, but again, I also understand why a lot of people would never put it on there. Basically, this is a game from the people that did Kingdom of Loathing, kind of a long-running online game. It obviously is kind of an old west craziness where there's also magic and skeletons and things. This game has a sense of humor, and it's actually funnier than most games out there, in my opinion, that have a sense of humor. It is kind of, actually the combat is just a turn-based RPG with surprisingly in-depth character progression and things like that, and choices you have to make. There are 3 different classes you can play, and I think the combat's fun, and the characters and the story and the humor is great. This is an inexpensive game. It's a little bit on sale, and if that sort of wackiness sounds appealing to you, then definitely check this out. All right, next up we have Neo. So some people will say, oh, this is just a Dark Souls clone. Well, there are Dark Souls clones out there. Some of them not very well done. What Neo has to offer is combat similar to Dark Souls, difficulty similar to Dark Souls, but also some other unique things. There are some mechanisms in this game that aren't in Dark Souls. If you didn't like Dark Souls, you won't play this, or you won't like this, I'm assuming. If you did, you might... You may or may not like this, but overall, I feel like out of the games that are similar to Dark Souls, this is the best one by far because, first of all, it is very good looking. It plays very well. It's not as clunky as some of the other clones, but it also offers its own unique mechanisms with these key timers in it and just other unique stuff. And overall, I think just a really solid game that I can't say about most of the other Dark Souls clones out there. All right, next up, we have Sonic Mania. So this was designed in large part by I can't remember, it was one person or multiple people who had done kind of other Sonic games in the style of the older games and updated them and did their own stuff. So this is a game kind of designed around some of the older Sonic games. There are kind of reboots that with more interesting and complicated levels than the original ones and their own original levels as well. And if old school 2D Sonic interests you, then you finally have a good game. If Sonic interests you, you finally have a good game. So that's all I really have to say about that. You probably know whether or not you're a fan of Sonic or not, and if you are, then highly recommend Sonic Mania. All right, next up we have A Hat in Time. So there was a lot of hype this year for Yooka-Laylee, a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, and it was a game that some people defended, a lot of people didn't like, and then this came out, a lot of people said this game did it better. Now, while Mario Odyssey may have a similar design to this, a 3D platformer collectathon, and be a better overall game than this, that is a game developed by Nintendo with many, many millions of dollars and lots of production. This is a smaller indie game, but it's really fun, and and there are interesting levels to the game. Some of the levels have unique things and kind of themes and ways that things play out that are a little bit different than some other games. It's a really cute and really fun 3D action platformer, and if you like that style of gameplay and you haven't heard of this, I definitely suggest checking this one out. All right, now this you might say, what in the world is this? Why are you showing me this? Opus Magnum. This is from Zachtronics. They have made a lot of games that kind of revolve somewhat around like programming elements and things like that. Sinjin.io is one of the more well-known ones, and this game is a little bit different. You can argue whether or not there's programming. I would argue it's not really this, and you may look at it and say, what is this? So it is a game where you're technically doing like alchemy and converting things into other things, and the point of it is you choose different components in order to build these things with in order to make an end product, and you can try to make it as efficient as you want, as far as the least number of movements of the machines, as small as you want, as cost effective as you want. You can try to do a combination of the three. You can compare it to other people or your friends if they also played this game, and you can share little gifs of how your machine works. And you may say, what in the world is this? Why would I care? All I have to say is you're either looking at if the idea of building something as efficiently as you can appeals to you, go check out this game. I can't describe how fun it actually is for that type of mindset from just the screenshots. It's one of these games that pretty much everyone who's played it who likes that style of game and shows off the gifts of people who aren't interested in it. They look at the gifts and go, this looks dumb. But if the idea of building the most efficient thing possible and doing it different ways and kind of using your brain in that way sounds appealing, this game is way more satisfying than it can possibly appear in the video and pictures on screen. All right, next up, Stories Untold. I've talked about this before. This is kind of a horror game. There are multiple kind of vignettes, if you will, little things you go through, like a text adventure and just other things. And overall, I feel like this game is worth talking about, not only because the first of the games, if you will, in this kind of, it's all considered one game, but there are different experiences within it. The first one came out for free, the text adventure here. It was really solid, and then they came out with multiple ones to add to it. And while some of the gameplay may be kind of iffy overall, as far as, and there isn't a lot of gameplay, this is a story game overall, the way it all ties together, I think, is fantastic. And if kind of not the necessarily like jump scare, really graphic violence horror, but more suspense, what's going on horror interests you, just get this game. It's $3.39 right now, and I don't think you'll be disappointed by it. All right, the last game I'm going to talk about is Thimbleweed Park. I actually did a little bit of a podcast with my friend Steve on kind of the return of these point-and-click adventure games, and Thimbleweed Park is in the vein of a lot of these Maniac Mansion and things like that. A lot of these old school games, and I really think it's done well. It's a fantastic point-and-click adventure game, and basically you probably know whether or not you like those style of games. I do like that I believe there's multiple difficulty modes in this, and it just you play multiple characters, and if that style of game interests you, well, they're back, and this is probably the best one from this year. So there you go. There's 25 games from this year to play, one more from a previous year, also some other games that I mentioned that I all think are potentially worth checking out depending on your interest. Of course, a lot of them are on sale right now. Go check them out. If I had to give a game of the year this year, because I didn't do an official award ceremony, like I said, I would give art design to Cuphead. I would give it to Divinity Original Sin 2. I think the way they did the co-op, the way they did all the voice acting, the lengthy, interesting story, the turn-based action point combat that was an improvement over the last one, in my opinion. There's the spell armor and physical armor. There's a lot of depth to the combat, which you're going to be doing a lot of in such a long game. It's just fantastic. If you don't like CRPGs, you're not going to like it. If you do, it may have taken over. Baldur's Gate 2 is the best CRPG ever, in my opinion. That's how much I liked it. Now, as far as story overall, I think I'd give it to Nier Automata. I loved the story in that. Also, and again, that might have been on my end of the year list. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Edith Finch, a story game as opposed to a game with a story, also fantastic. There was a lot of great stuff out there. Night in the Woods. Actually, wait a minute. If we're just talking story game, Night in the Woods, overall story, and a different game, Nier Automata, there was a lot of great games this year. I don't know if it really was one of the best games best years ever. Like I said, there's potential because there was a lot of great games early in the year, but there's a lot of great options out there. So I don't know. Let me know if you'd prefer. I did a Game of the Year awards last year where I broke things down individual category. If you guys prefer that, if you prefer this, let me know in the comments. But hopefully that gave you some ideas of some games that maybe you haven't checked out yet this year that are worth checking out. Because if that sort of genre of that game interests you, I think these are the best of the best of the year. Overall, fantastic year. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon.